One of the hardest things about having children on the spectrum wasn't actually the children. It was getting other people, especially my own family, to understand my children and to accept them. And one of the biggest people that I had to do that for was my own husband, their dad. Which you'd kind of think, well, that's silly. You shouldn't have had to do that. Now, you have to remember, when our children were diagnosed, this was the early noughties, which wasn't as big and an in thing that it is now. Now it's widely accepted. And it's more well known now. The awareness has really come along. But back then, it wasn't. And it was still quite taboo. And people had the very wrong ideas about autism and what it could mean and everything else. And my husband is also on the spectrum, and there was two aspects. First, he had to accept the children, accept their diagnosis. Loving them has never been a question, but accepting their diagnosis and what that may mean for them and what that meant as who they are was very hard for him to accept. He's a man as well, and he is your typical man's man. He's in his 40s. He's been raised in that way. But the second part was when he was diagnosed. And he's still struggling to this day. He was diagnosed nearly 20 years ago. He still refuses to acknowledge the diagnosis at times. Unless it's actually in his benefit, then suddenly it will kind of come around as a social manipulation and an avoidance tactic. Because, of course, that's part of his PDA. He is very good at accepting his autism to use it as an avoidant demand, but he's not so great at accepting it for what it really is. So he won't understand it still fully, and living with that can be hard because I want to batter him round the bloody head and say, knock this crap off. But I've also got to remember he's got to get things right in his own head first. Then he's got to be comfortable with it. Then he's got to move past that, acceptance, and then we can work with it. So when anything new gets chucked at him, anything that's a demand that gets chucked at him, I always have to remember these steps and everything else. And does he remember that I'm autistic? No, freaking hell does he not. Which is really frustrating because I'd like him to remember, I am at times too. But hey ho, I love him. But a lot of the time, mums especially, the biggest thing that if you ask most mums, they'll say it's not them accepting their kids, it's others. So if you've got family members with autism, bear that in mind when you're dealing with the mums. It's not easy for a mum. Have a good day.